I'd like to call the Budget Committee back into order for deliberations on the proposed budget. This is a closed session, so it will not be open for public comment. The first order of business will be the approval of the elected officials' salary proposal, and I've asked Danny if he'd briefly review that proposal, and then we're open for a motion.
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the Budget Committee, I can do that. As you're aware, the three lay citizens on the Budget Committee serve by statute, by Oregon law, as the elected officials salary review committee. Each year you deliberate to discuss what the salaries will be set out for elected officials in our county. So this is a specific set of laws in Oregon law that govern how elected officials are paid. There's a series of criteria that you're required to consider in doing that. The elected officials salary review committee this year has met twice in publicly noticed meetings. Last week on Thursday, I believe, you met and met with each of the elected officials except for county commissioners, and on Tuesday at 11:30 you met to review and deliberate towards setting the salaries for elected officials. Essentially, in my budget, I proposed no COLA adjustment for elected officials, managers, and confidential employees. This particular issue that you're addressing has just to do with elected officials. You'll adopt, if you adopt, the no COLA adjustment for managers and confidential employees. You'll do that as part of the overall budget process. In this case, you deliberated towards that proposal in my budget, and you agreed unanimously as a budget committee not to provide a COLA adjustment, a pay increase for CPI to elected officials. Several years back, you'll recall that you adopted the equivalent of a step plan for elected officials. Essentially, each year, from the time someone's taken office up through the potential of 6 years, they may be eligible for a step increase in the step plan. Generally, our step plan starts 10 to 15% lower when someone comes into office than comparable counties, and as they move up, if they're re-elected and make it to the sixth step, it comes in roughly about 10% higher. So spans the whole width over the time and experience that they gain. In this case, your committee met, discussed each of the elected official positions. I would note that I think this is going on the third year with regard to step increases happen in January. COLA adjustments happen in July of each year. The reason why step increases happen in January is because January is when someone takes office, generally, unless they're appointed to fill a vacant term. This going on the third year, I will note that the county commissioners agreed to freeze themselves 2 years back, so this will be the January will be the third year that the commissioners have not taken any step increases. That was also discussed in this deliberation, and once again, the commissioners, based on the unanimous vote of the Budget Committee, or Salary Review Committee, will not receive any step increases. They also will not receive the cost of living adjustment. So that left the other elected officials who were eligible for step increases, and you approved moving those elected officials through to the next step, with the exception of the sheriff, and that is not because he wouldn't have been eligible for a step increase, but because he's reached the top step of the pay range. And so county commissioners and the sheriff would not receive a step increase. Our other elected officials, which are the assessor, the county clerk, the district attorney, who receives just a stipend from the county because they're actually a state employee, the justice of the peace, and the county surveyor are all eligible for a step increase, and the Budget Committee did vote unanimously to award a step increase. Also want to say that as part of what you directed me to prepare for you today in your motion, that should an office become vacant during the period of the next fiscal year, whoever was to take office would be appointed at step one. So whoever, the different elected officials are at different steps in the pay plan, but regardless of that, if there were a need to appoint someone to fill a position, they would come into the step plan at step one. I think that pretty much answered what you asked me to report on, Mr. Chair. If there's any questions, I'd be welcome to.
Any questions? I'd like a motion to accept.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of order number 5313 in the matter of approving the 2013-14 fiscal year-end elected official salaries for Jackson County, Oregon, as recommended by the Elected Officials Salary Committee.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
We have a second. Would you call the roll?
Ms. Sibbett?
Yes.
Ms. Morris? Commissioner Rasher?
Yes.
Commissioner Skundrick?
Yes.
Commissioner Reidenfeld?
Yes.
Commissioner, sorry, I missed it. Chair Rudison.
Please don't. All right. That may be the last. Yes.
So I would just like to encourage the elected officials, and I realize the commissioners have chosen not to accept step increases, and I'd like to encourage the other elected officials to accept their step increases. I'm always concerned that our salaries for elected officials won't keep pace with the market, and so we'll potentially lose the opportunity to have folks who do need to earn a salary that supports a family enter into running for office in the county. So I certainly hope that we recognize that we have several new elected officials that are younger, supporting families, and I just hate to see a precedent established that that lays an expectation that all elected officials will not accept their step increases and keep their salaries in pace with market. So just my personal opinion, and wanted to throw that out there.
Very good. I second that. Other comments? All right. Motion carried, and we'll move on. As everyone is aware, we have a large difference. I think it's $6.8 million between revenue and expenses. And we have an ever-shrinking rainy day fund. So we as a budget committee met in a public meeting earlier for about 4 or 5 hours. Did not vote on anything, but discussed each of these issues at some length. So we all understood what the issue was about, what a possible solution might be, and recognized the fact that we do have an economic crunch time coming in this county. So a lot of discussion has already been had. Not that we won't have more discussion on the issue, but if we tend to shortcut in your minds that we are not taking the time to do proper deliberation or discuss the issue, that is not true, because we have had another meeting dedicated to just the discussion of these issues and trying to see what common ground that we could have between us in order to come up with a solution. We're trying to come up with solutions as opposed to just taking lead axe and cutting everything. So keep that in the back of your minds. And what I'd like to do today is on these different subjects we talked about, and I'd like to have, I don't know what the right word is, I was going to use champion, but I don't know if that's the correct word, or sponsor, but I'm going to ask one person on the committee to kind of take the lead and present the issue, and if they feel like a motion, at least we can take a motion, see if we're going to get a second, and if we don't get a second, then we'll drop the issue and move on. But if we get a second, then we'll take some time, make sure everybody's understands the issue, and before we move to a vote. So I'm not trying to rush this thing through, and if anybody thinks we're moving too fast, I'm more than happy to hear from you. But in order to keep it moving, I think that's the way to handle the discussion, unless anybody has some difference. And I'm sure there'll be differences of opinion. So the first subject, and it's the biggest issue is our libraries. And I've asked Don Skundrich if he could be the lead on the library issue. And Don, why don't you lead out, kind of handle it the way you want
Well,
to? And,
Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind, break protocol here for a little bit before we address the libraries. I'd like to bring up another subject first that I think it would have a direct, could have a substantial impact on the situation we face, and that's expenses over revenue for 13, 14, and for the foreseeable future. And that's the subject of revenue enhancement. Now, this may sound like good old government tax and spend, but I don't believe in this case that's it at all. I handed out to my fellow board members this morning. We have not discussed this. This is something that we had a short discussion on it during the meeting that you mentioned, but no, we didn't vote or anything, just quickly. But a copy of a proposal I'd like to lay before you, because I think, in fact, if we were to take something like this up, it would take care of the issue that we've got, being $6.8, $6.7 million short, and facing some of the cuts. Some of them are drastic that we may have to take to reach that, to try to get to somewhat closer to reduce that deficit spending, if you will. My proposal is to apply a surcharge, if you will. Might be a better name for it. I'm not a wordsmith. I'm an old concrete guy. But on residential units, that would be called, for lack of a better word, a jail surcharge. And the reason I use that is because our jail, our county jail, serves the whole county geographically. All the police departments within the county use it at one time or another. But I was thinking so that's the reason I'm calling it all citizens of Jackson County surcharge on an annual basis. And I prepared, you have before you a schedule of amounts and the returns that would bring the county on an annual basis. Starting with $2 per unit, per household, per month, up to, and I went up to $10 per household per month. I've got some information from the assessor's office, and in Jackson County we have 76,651 residences within the county. That does not include rental units, and they would have to be considered as well, but I did not have that data, so it's not included. And so like I said, using this schedule that you have in front of you, and this is for the public, since you guys can all read what you have, but the $2 per unit per month would bring the county on an annual basis of $1,800,000 plus. $6 per unit would bring the county $5,500,000 plus on an annual basis. And $10 per unit, if you went to the top of my schedule, presented schedule, would bring $9.1 million plus to the county on an annual basis. And what I'm thinking about here is that by doing this, would not only balance this particular year's budget, if we came into something between that $5, $6, $7 per unit per month basis, but it will also give the county a sustainable, reliable, stable funding source into the future. Like I said earlier, and we've heard through the presentations, as well as from our administrator, as well as the other department heads, that we don't see any short-term solution to this. We'd like to think, well, we're going to get back in and maybe timber is going to be a deal, or maybe the government's going to bail us out again or something. But I'm looking at us taking care of our own. And I'm suggesting this, that the great thing about a surcharge, if there is such a thing as great in surcharge, is that it can be changed, rescinded, increased as the need arises. And the reason I bring that up is if for some reason, one of those two issues that I just talked about, whether we're able to get back into some sustainable forest management, some cutting timber, if you will, or if the federal government, through their largeness, decides to give us payment in lieu of taxation, PILs, then we could go back and we could look at this surcharge and say, gee, we don't need to do that, or we can reduce that. Let's take that off. Let's not charge our citizens that because we have other monies coming in, or however one wanted to address it. But the reason I want to bring that up for us to discuss at this moment, because if we could come up with something like this just to begin with, then the other issue becomes moot. So I lay that up for
Well, the other issue
discussion.
Doesn't become moot. I mean, the way it's laid out, yeah, we would at that point in time if you can bring this on board for that much revenue. But have you figured out a way to? I'm not against it, but have you figured out a way to collect it?
Well, I've had some discussions with the administrator. There are probably a few different kind of vehicles, if you will, be part of the utility bill, et cetera, recognizing that each city has different utility billings as such, and then we'd also have to deal with the non-incorporated population within the county. But I think those, in discussing it with the administrator, the idea is that I think that something workable could come out, and we could even pay for the cost, the additional cost of administrating, billing, and collection of the dollars. I haven't got the details to answer how exactly, but I'm confident it could be done. I think, before hopefully somebody else will talk, and if not, I know I'm dying up here, but is that I think we've heard there's going to be a couple of issues that are going to be probably more drastically affected than maybe some others. Public safety is going to be a thing. We listened to community justice. We know we're going to have good discussions about the library. And we just got through hearing about discussions about our community partners this morning and all the good work that they do. I believe these would be folks that would be able to mobilize in support of this. That's just me thinking that. But what it is, it shares the burden, and I think it does it equitably in this particular matter.
Is there any legal, or is there some kind of injunction proceedings that could stop this if it weren't approved? What I'm talking about is, well, this solves our problem. Let's wrap her up and go home. And 6 months down the road, we find out it can't work or won't work. Then what do we do? So, how do you assure me that this is our solution?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'll take a shot at answering your question. First of all, let me say that this is, a recent concept that we really haven't had enough time to fully, thoroughly investigate how it would be implemented. However, there are examples of this being done in our county already by cities who add a surcharge for public safety onto utility bills. This actually started with the city of Jacksonville several years back. It was actually contested in a court case and went through the Oregon Supreme Court and was upheld. And essentially, just to offer a little more explanation, the courts have upheld that for purposes of Measure 50, this is not a tax. It's a fee. It's not assessed to a property owner, it's assessed to each residence and the occupant of the residence. How something like this would be facilitated as opposed to a taxing district or an operating levy or many other options is by board ordinance. The county has specified protocol for how ordinances are adopted in its charter, and essentially it would require public hearings. It would require the board to take action to implement an ordinance, and then of course the question that you asked about the mechanisms for implementing it would still have to be researched. The issue with ordinances in any jurisdiction is an ordinance can be repealed by the governing body, but it can also be repealed through an initiative petition. So if the public weren't agreeable, they would have a course of action, potentially, for repealing it. All of those would be unknowns as we start off. I will say each city who operates under a charter has different provisions about how implementing something like this can occur. In our charter, depending on how a proposal like this may be worded in terms of how the ordinance is designed, may or may not require an election even prior to the board implementing an ordinance. So there is a potential that it could require an election even if the board did it as an ordinance process. And that's based on the charter that our voters have put in place with regard to revenue generation in our county. So I don't really have an exact answer for you, but I can tell you those would all be things that would have to be considered if Commissioner Skundrick's proposal were to be something that the Budget Committee were to consider. In terms of timing, essentially it would require the drafting of an ordinance, which probably a best case scenario would be at least a month to do that. It would require the ordinance process to occur, so the setting of a hearing with proper notice, and then setting of a first reading and notice of second reading and public hearing. Then it would require a second reading and public hearing 2 weeks later. If an ordinance were to pass, it would likely not. In fact, our charter, I don't think, allows a revenue item to be put in as an emergency, so it would require at least 60 days before it would actually become effective. And after the board were to act on an ordinance, and this isn't just specific to this ordinance, it can be specific to any ordinance, there is a time period where, as I said, an appeal could be satisfied. So, under the best case scenario, if we could deal with just those things I've identified right now, and honestly, there hasn't been a whole lot of time to research a lot regarding this issue, you would probably be talking at least 4 months. So I think I answered all your questions. I hope so.
I was under the assumption that we could affect the emergency ordinance. All the other sorts as far as repeal would be in place, but I thought we could.
Well, no, Commissioner Skundrick, we may be able to. As I said, it really kind of depends on exactly how the ordinance is worded, whether or not it triggers criteria in our charter. So we'd have to actually draft an ordinance before I could answer it for certain. It is a possibility, but it also may not be possible.
Chair? Yes. So I'd like to commend Commissioner Skundrick for coming up with what I consider to be a very creative idea and alternative to the many reductions that we would have to talk about this afternoon, and maybe we still need to. I am kind of concerned about the devil's in the details on this particular item, and I guess I would pose the question is, if this idea has legs for us, how do we proceed? Do we proceed with, this is going to be the fix to our budget problem, or do we go ahead and discuss what would happen if we can't do that? I'd like to hear what everybody's thoughts are on that.
I was going to bring up just about what you said there, that I think this is something that would solve the Budget Committee's problem, but it's really in the hands of the Board of Commissioners and the County Administrator. And I think my issue would be I'd give it support. But if it doesn't, and there's some roadblocks and problems, and it's held up for one reason or another, I think there has to be an alternative course of action that we would take. And the one we have agreed on the libraries could still go forward and not affect them in the first year, but that they may want to look at a different source of funding. I think the cuts, we could hold those cuts that we talked about, and what's the right word? We could not actually make the cuts effective for a period of time, but we would at least know that this didn't go through. This is the second plan of action that's going to happen. And that's kind of my feeling.
And before the rest of the group talks, I'd like to say, I want to apologize for the lateness of this, but it's as we've been dealing with this issue, and one can say, well, I kind of had a good idea about that in December. But I agree, this is an 11th hour fix, if you will, but I would feel remiss if we weren't going to at least discuss it, and obviously I'd like to see us act on it, but here at this time, and again, I do apologize for the shortness, and then because of public meeting laws, obviously I can't discuss that with my fellow commissioners, or could I discuss it with a quorum in the budget committee. So this is the first time they've seen, basically.
No apologies are required for having a good idea at the last minute.
And it doesn't mean we can't take a vote, but it doesn't mean we would exclude continuing with the other part of it either. Anybody got a different opinion or a variation of that? Or?
You go first.
No variation of it. I mean, we do have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers here in Jackson County to produce a balanced budget no matter what we do. And there's a little bit of uncertainty on how this would play out in the future. Logistically, it has a lot of questions that are not answered at this time. I still believe that we need to be looking at the budget we have and take necessary steps to prepare for the future in the event that something like this doesn't come to fruition. If this does come to fruition, then we have to take a look at this and maybe look at a supplemental budget down the line.
Danny?
This may just be semantics, but essentially we wouldn't need to do a supplemental budget because we would have less revenue than we projected, but we would have to make cuts in the budget. So we only do a supplemental budget when we get more money and want to spend it. When we actually get less money, we just can't spend it. And one way you may choose to proceed, depending on if the Budget Committee wanted to direct staff to pursue this as an option, we certainly could do a whole lot more work. And we certainly have until July 1st till this budget's actually effective. So we have several months here to kind of do some work and research. You could discuss at the same time the potential for that not being able to be affected, and then what you would direct me to do in the budget should that occur. And, you know, we obviously can even go into the budget a little bit. There's not a law that says we can't do that, and then you could reconvene or you could pre-direct what you would like to have done depending on the outcome. So there's a lot of ways you could choose to proceed, and you can always convene the Budget Committee at any time you'd like. So even if a supplemental budget isn't required, you could still convene and have the discussion.
I'm looking at this, and originally my bottom line is we really need to cut the budget. We really need to not go and use as much of our reserves as Danny has presented to us. I think we need to go down to about a $5 million deficit. So if I look at it, we're at 6.7. If $5 a unit would raise 4.6, I still think we need to go through the exercise of cutting about $1.5 million to have that in place should this not go forward, or perhaps even if it goes forward. Because I'm concerned about putting $10 a unit on someone, maybe not 5. But I think everyone needs to understand if it fails, where the cuts will come from. I think they need to be prepared for that if that's what it comes to.
Sure. Well, first I want to
I want to commend Commissioner Skundrick for his creativity here. Unfortunately, I don't agree with this approach philosophically for two reasons. Number one, I do feel it is a tax, and I know Danny threw out a fee, but when I look at a fee is something that I choose to pay. If I own a dog, I choose to have that dog and pay that license fee. A fee is what I pay to have my car. If I build a new house, it's a fee. A tax is something that I don't have any control over as a citizen. If we approve this as a citizen, they won't have any control. They have to pay it. So in my mind, it is a tax. Now, I would be all in favor of this if this went to a public vote and the public voted for it. Then I'm fine. But I think if this went to a public vote right now, the public would not vote in favor of this. And if the public didn't vote in favor of this, a majority, is that something that we want to be doing up here of overriding the public's concern? But like I say, I'm just one of six. Another concern I have about it is also philosophical. I'm worried that if we take this approach, that the public, and especially environmental groups, will say, well, see, we don't need to log anymore because we were able to just tax the people, so let's leave the forest. And we all agree the forests are in terrible shape. Well, most of us agree the forests are in terrible shape and need some work there. And so are we going to get that opinion that, well, it's solved itself, let's just leave the forests the way they are? I think we're making some real progress, especially through efforts of Congressman Walden and DeFazio, and they had a hearing today back in Washington. I think we're getting closer to solving this by seeing some receipts off of federal timberland. So anyway, I apologize for not agreeing with this, but philosophically that's the way I feel.
Well, I didn't expect 100% agreement at all on this. I would say, if I could, rebut the situation a little bit as far as this would take the pressure off of trying to get a fix in the federal courts, because you and I are on the same track on that issue, is that it has been made clear through hearings and such at the state level and at the federal level that counties need to step up a little bit more. And now, whether one agrees with that or not, I think this would do more than anything in showing good faith that Jackson County is saying, we're taking our role responsibly. Yes, do we need some help? Absolutely. Would we like some help? Absolutely. Would we love to get back into the court? Absolutely. But we're stepping up and saying, rather than wait on the come, we're being proactive. And so I think, if anything, I think it would have a more positive impact on our legislators, federal and state, than negative. That's just my opinion.
Well, the issue about the public vote is kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know if it'd pass or not.
Mr. Chairman, we are definitely making headway on timber and ONC land specifically. I would want to echo Commissioner Rasher's concern on being able to keep that pressure on them, because that is very important as we make that headway. And that is what that land was set aside for, is for the counties.
Well, we've been fighting that battle for 10 years. And I don't want to, I won't be here. You may. But in 10 years, I don't want to see us sitting up here talking about the same thing. In 10 years, maybe the government's going to do something about it.
I fought it for 25.
Mr. Chair, so listening to this conversation is helpful for me, and I appreciate that. I see that the timber issue is a long-term strategy for financial sustainability, and Commissioner Skundrick's idea is, I would categorize it as a short-term solution for financial sustainability. So I think we need to put that in perspective, that we can do something in the short term that will prevent us from making cuts that will impact a great many citizens of Jackson County in a way that won't be well received. That doesn't mean that we have to stop working on looking to the long-term solution with the timber issue, which I hardly agree is a great idea. But I also recognize that we've been talking about that for a long time, and I don't know. I don't see that coming in the next couple of years. So maybe if we looked at it through the lens of short-term, long-term solutions, maybe that might be helpful for the conversation.
Could this be a permanent deadline?
I don't know what you mean by
Well,
that. Yeah.
could you go forward with it and maybe even without a vote, if it was successful, if it had a sunset, a 4-year, you'd have to, that's much more palatable.
So the board's authority to enact ordinance comes from the county charter. They can actually repeal an ordinance at any time. So they could implement it for a year and repeal it. They could implement it and immediately repeal it. They can implement it and modify it. They have a lot of latitude. Each of those actions has the potential of being repealed, not by the board, but through an initiative process, depending on what they were to do. Essentially, it's a budget discussion for the purposes of revenue, but really the authority to do the act lies in the authority of the Board of Commissioners. So it would be something that they essentially would have to direct, and I think they wouldn't obviously do that unless they had your concurrence as a budget committee. But pretty much anything that the board would want the ordinance to do, we can potentially structure as long as it fits within the law. And as I said before, this may or may not require, it may require a vote. I mean, it may be that it requires a vote, so.
Just, April, and are being formal here. That's one of the, I thought, one of the beauties of this is that it could change, could be in a year from now, if something should happen, we do it even sooner than that. So it's very, very flexible, either keeping it or reducing it or expanding or whatever that case. And then my last comment, and I promise I'll shut up, and I'll respond to Commissioner Rasher's comment on the tax fee issue. Philosophically, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I absolutely agree with that. But I do know that 70% of our general funds go to community justice. Okay? Public safety, pardon me, thank you. Public safety. A big portion of that is the jail over here. And we can't even, we've heard the sheriff talk yesterday, we heard the DA talk yesterday, we heard community justice talk yesterday. We've got early releases, et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to do our best. Remodel on that bottom floor. We don't quite have enough money to put officers there yet, but hopefully that'll happen. Trying to do that. The reason why I think this is equitable, and I understand your analogy about whether I choose to or not. I choose to have criminals locked up. But I can't. And so unless we take that portion of the general fund and make sure, and I think we're all pretty much agreed that's very important. That's our number one priority, and I agree with that. But here's an opportunity to say, citizens of Jackson County, okay, every one of us, I don't care if you live in Medford or Prospect or the Applegate or you name it, lives are going to be touched at one time or another, probably, or someone they know's life's going to be touched by the criminality of some sort. And what this is doing is saying, okay, we want to keep that up, but we also recognize the importance of some of these other issues. So we would pull that amount of money that we would be putting over there out of the general fund and put it back into these other issues. So that's how I get around that. Maybe semantics, it may be a cop out, but that's kind of the way I get around that tax fee situation. But I understand your argument.
Well, I would support, I guess I would support moving forward with this because we don't know all the details, and as Craig says, the devil may be in the details.
Oh, God could be in there too.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
We all ought to be on pretty good behavior.
Well, you
then.
choose your side, I'll choose mine.
No. Anyway, if we move on a parallel course, as we discussed in the meeting, and this, I would vote for it. But if we choose not to move on a parallel course with other decisions we made, then I would be against it, because I think it leads us it could lead us down the wrong track, and we're one more year down the road, and we're in deep trouble. That would be my position.
Well, my only answer to that, Mr. Ritzile, is that we can amend this at any time. I mean, it's not as if we don't do anything, if we don't make these series of cuts today. We can't make them.
Yeah, but
Remember, the budget doesn't go into effect until July 1. But
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that is, to me, this is better than just kick the can, but it's synonymous with kicking the can down the road one more year. We did it last year, now we do it this year. And I think it's time to bite the bullet and let the public understand what's going to happen.